Another day, more executive orders from the president. He says he's going to build that wall. Some Christian charities oppose the move. And student loan debt, it's a bigger problem than what we've been told. It's a ticking time bomb that could explode and take the economy with it. That's today on SkyWatchTV. Mysterious booms in San Diego. China says it's controlling its own weather, and Kim Jong-Un's days in power may be numbered. It's SkyWatch TV for Thursday, January 26th, 2017. I'm Derek Gilbert. First up, Donald Trump's next executive orders would reduce the U.S. role in the United Nations and other international organizations. New York Times reporting that Trump plans to cut U.S. funding to international groups by at least 40%. He'd also plan to cut off funds to any UN agency or other international body that gives full membership to the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or works to get around international sanctions against North Korea. That basically means the United Nations, which gets about a quarter of its funding from the United States. President Trump also signed an executive order Tuesday that called for construction of a border wall. Surprise, Mr. Trump apparently means what he said. A second order signed Tuesday seeks to end sanctuary cities, cities that give a free legal pass to people in the country illegally. He would triple the number of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, agents and give them the power to actually enforce immigration laws. It will also create a victims advocacy office for Americans with loved ones who'd been victimized by people who weren't supposed to be in the country in the first place. Now, some evangelical ministries oppose the changes in immigration policy coming from the White House. Christian aid groups that have been resettling refugees, like World Relief, say the president's order further traumatizes people who've been through a lot already. World Relief took on about 11,000 cases last year. That's a record high since 1999. But while we have no doubt that many of the people who volunteer or work for these organizations truly want to help people who just want a better lives for themselves and their families, as with anything that involves us fallen humans and anything that requires work, logistics, material, equipment, cold, hard cash changes hands, and a lot of it. Refugee Resettlement Watch, which is a news site that tracks the immigration crisis and its impact on the United States, has examined the IRS Form 990s. Those are tax documents that have to be filed every year by nonprofit organizations. Looked at a number of them for Christian charities involved in resettling immigrants for the fiscal year 2012, and found that the majority of the budgets of these organizations is coming from the federal government in form of tax dollars being spent to resettle immigrants in the United States. For example, 98% of the budget of Catholic charities, or 98% of their budget for resettling refugees, in other words, $69 million out of the $70 million budget, was supplied by the federal government. Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, 97% of its $43 million budget came from the United States government. In other words, from you and me. Church World Services, 60% of its entire budget, that's $45 million in 2012 from federal money, given to them to resettle refugees. And World Relief, 68% of their $56 million budget, in other words, $38 million, came from the government to pay for resettling refugees. In other words, every refugee resettled in the United States means a check from the federal government. Now, I don't want to cast a blanket accusation or aspersion on the character of anybody involved here, but money talks. And sadly, it appears that these charity organizations have a vested interest in continuing the crisis, because the more refugees they settle, the more money they take in. Now, I will say again, I have no doubt that most of the people working for these organizations genuinely want to help people in need. But just remember, when you hear a story about Christian aid organizations critical of this change in immigration policy, remember, their livelihoods may depend on continuing this crisis. And by the way, you remember this image from the protests last Sunday? Well, let's call them what they are. The riots in Washington, D.C. last Sunday. Turns out the limousine destroyed by rioters belongs to a Muslim immigrant. His business now faces a $70,000 loss, plus medical costs for an injured employee. Well done, anti-Trumpers. Well done. Christian leaders have called on the president to form a commission on national healing. Reverend Samuel Rodriguez, president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, along with Rabbis Abraham Cooper and Yitzhak Adlerstein, made the proposal earlier this month. Rodriguez said Vice President Mike Pence should head it up. If President Trump can make inroads into the Hispanic community, like he has apparently made already with labor unions, well, you can see why Democrats are beginning to freak out. Again, the Hispanic community and the Jewish community typically vote mostly Democrat. Speculation continues, by the way, over the president's nominee for the Supreme Court vacancy created when Antonin Scalia passed away last year. Senator Ted Cruz has said that if Democrats try to block the president's nomination, he will lobby for the nuclear option to lower the bar for confirmation from 60 senators, which would require 8 Democrats to change sides, 60 required to override a filibuster, to a simple majority, which means all they need to get are Republican senators in order to approve the next Supreme Court justice. The Sanhedrin sent a letter to Donald Trump blessing President Trump and calling on him to obey the Noahide laws. Letter sent earlier this week. The 7 Noahide laws, if you're not familiar, do not deny God, do not blaspheme God, do not murder, do not engage in illicit sexual relations, do not steal, and do not eat of a live animal. In other words, don't consume blood. This taken from the Bible, where God basically passes on his standard of conduct to Noah after the flood. The Sanhedrin was reconstituted in 2004 by a group of rabbis from various Orthodox communities in Israel. It should be said that not all Jews acknowledge this Sanhedrin's authority. And Kim Jong-un's days in power may be numbered. That's according to a high-level North Korean defector, Tae Yong-ho, who was a former minister in the North Korean embassy in London, escaped to South Korea with his wife and 2 sons last summer. Coming up, China says it controls the weather. Seriously. And we'll discuss the mystery booms in San Diego. That's ahead on SkyWatch TV.
Recently, SkyWatchTV held a No Fences Tell Your Story writing contest. After hundreds of writers submitted their inspirational stories, 10 SkyWatchTV judges worked together to narrow it down to 10 beautifully told accounts in the brand new anthology, Learning to Lean. Right now, when you purchase Learning to Lean from the SkyWatchTV store for only $19.95, you'll also receive absolutely free Living a Supernatural Life. Find out how to live in the reality of the supernatural realm, attuned in mind and heart to God's kingdom, coming in power through the Holy Spirit living in you. Plus, we want to help you tell your inspirational stories, so we're also including free a brand new, beautiful spiral-bound personal journal. Put to pen and organize your chapters, thoughts, and outlines, or use as the perfect Bible devotion companion for jotting down your favorite scripture verses. Altogether, this Learning to Lean anthology special offer holds a retail value of $55. Now for only $19.95 plus shipping and handling at SkyWatchTVstore.com. Be inspired as you learn to lean on God's miraculous grace at work in our lives today with the Learning to Lean anthology special offer.
China is going to make it rain. The government says it has the power to do so, technology to create rain over an area twice the size of France. And it's spending about $175 million to end a drought in its northwestern provinces. It's nothing new, really. This is a technique that's been tried for decades, spraying dry ice and silver iodide in the air. It's called cloud seeding. Again, nothing new. China did this back in 2008 when it launched 1,100 rockets filled with silver iodide into clouds over Beijing so they'd have nice, clear skies for the opening ceremonies, fireworks for the Olympic Games. The Church of England is considering a plan to allow openly gay clergy. Currently, gay priests in the Church of England are asked to remain celibate or change jobs. The House of Bishops Tuesday took up proposals to avoid asking the clergy about their sex lives. This is leading to growing divisions within the Church of England and within the Anglican Communion worldwide. We told you yesterday about the president's executive orders to get things moving again on the Keystone XL and Dakota Access oil pipelines. We haven't talked much about the protests going on for against the Dakota Access pipeline. The major media mostly ignored the protests. And to be honest, in reading some of the alternative media accounts of the protests, my spidey sense was tingling a little bit. I mean, just remember, just because it's not CNN reporting something doesn't mean that the account is reliable. One thing I can report, the Dakota Sioux, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe has issued a statement. This was a week ago, or last week, Friday, asking protesters at the site to vacate their camps by January 30th and to go home. Apparently, protesters have forced the closure of an important bridge that local residents need to get to work and to the hospital. There are also concerns about alcohol and drug abuse taking place at some of the protester camps. We'll see what happens next here. So the Dow Jones Industrials hit 20,000 this week for the first time ever. That's an all-time high, 3 times higher than right after the financial crisis in 2009 and 2010. Does it mean anything? In my opinion, and bear in mind that my degree in economics is only an undergraduate degree, but that said, the older I get, the more I recognize that all economics comes down to Econ 101, the law of supply and demand. The dollar, you see, is a commodity like pork bellies or corn futures. The more of them in circulation, the less they're worth, and the more pieces of green paper it takes to buy what you want. So, the market, in my opinion, has been inflated by too much money pumped into the system by the Federal Reserve in order to keep the banks afloat. Too much cheap money also pumped into the housing markets and the student loan market. I had a little house in St. Louis I bought in 1994 for about $92,000. It was appraised in 2006 for $182,000. We didn't strike oil or anything in the backyard. It was too easy to get mortgage loans. And so when there was too much money chasing the relatively same number of houses, the value of dollars to houses went down, which meant it took more of them to buy these houses. Well, if the president does what he says and cuts federal spending, which for some unknown reason counts toward our gross domestic product, the amount of money in circulation will decrease, meaning that the individual pieces of paper will be worth more. Now, this is a correction that's going to need to take place, but if you've borrowed money when money was worth less and you have to pay it back with dollars that are worth more, that could cause a problem for you because it will be harder to get your hands on those pieces of paper. Try to get yourself out of debt. Like I said, that correction is coming, and the less debt you have, the better you will be able to withstand it. And speaking of student loans, we're already seeing trouble in that market. There's too much cheap money. It's not necessarily helping college students by making it easier for them to get loans and by lowering the interest rate and stretching out the payments forever and ever. The average college graduate between the ages of 20 and 30 right now is paying about $325 a month. And this is a debt that can never, ever be discharged until it's paid off. In other words, if they suffer a medical issue and can't work and go into bankruptcy, that student loan just sits there racking up interest until they come out. This is a debt burden that could crush the American economy. It is now up to $1.3 trillion in student loan debt out there. And a new study shows that the default rate is a lot higher than we've been told. Department of Education just admitted that its previous statistics on loan repayment rates were way off due to a programming error. 99.8% of the numbers they reported were wrong. 99.8% of the numbers were wrong due to a programming error. Wall Street Journal found that about a quarter of the schools around the country, that's more than 1,000 colleges and universities, trade schools, at least half of the students with loans had either defaulted or had not made any payments at all in the last 7 years. I repeat, the student debt load in the United States is now $1.3 trillion. Remember when we had the financial crisis in 2008? The Toxic Asset Relief Program, TARP, the bailout fund for the banks was only $700 billion. Student loan debt is twice that and growing. This is something that could prevent a lot of millennials from ever owning a home. And this is why we're seeing record numbers of them in their 20s and 30s still living with mom and dad or renting because they can't qualify for a mortgage unless we relax the rules on mortgage lending, which then shifts the problem to mortgages. And we just went through the aftermath, the crisis, back in 2008. Watch this because, again, just get yourself out of debt, if at all possible, because this is a ticking time bomb. And finally, San Diego still trying to figure out what went boom Tuesday afternoon. Some residents reported a loud noise and felt some shaking just after 3 p.m. Tuesday afternoon. Others reported seeing a large glowing ball in the western sky. And no, that was not the sun, I presume. The National Weather Service and United States Geological Survey said they had no idea. It wasn't the weather, wasn't an earthquake. Military and airport officials, nothing that they knew about in the sky caused the noise. Just chalk this up to a mysterious mystery. We'll wait and see if an explanation ever comes. We've got a more portable version of our program available for you to carry around with you in your smart device or MP3 player. It's the SkyWatch TV podcast. These daily news updates, Into the Multiverse, Sci Friday, and of course our weekly interview programs, all available for you online. The SkyWatch TV podcast, log on to skywatchtv.com and then click the top menu bar where it says podcast. And we got some great news about the Hear the Watchman conference coming to Dallas March 31st through April 2nd. Of course, Sharon, myself, Josh Peck, Jake Grahutsky from SkyWatch TV will all be there. Pastor Carl Gallups has just been added to the lineup. This is some dynamic speaking you'll get a chance to hear and see that day, or that weekend rather. Pastor Carl Gallups, L.A. Marzulli, Russ Dizdar, Pastor Billy Crone, and more. For more information, hearthewatchman.com and save $20 on the registration by using the promo code SkyWatch. Thanks for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV.